Audio Jungle.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Rob McIntosh. Rob is the Senior Vice President of Global Operations at Dell. Rob has over 25 years of experience in the world of technology and operations. Rob, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure.
Rob, I like to start every interview the same way. There's a quote from Albert Einstein that says, "If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, then you don't understand it yourself." With that quote in mind, how would you describe what it is you do in a day-to-day role?
I get products that are manufactured either by Dell or by a contractor, delivered worldwide to customers.
I like it. I know you've been at Dell for over 25 years, obviously showing a resilient career, but I'd love to know more about those career change progressions. Could you walk me kind of through how has your career led you to the position you're in today?
Um, in short, Alex, I decided to get an MBA at Dell and I reverse engineered becoming a general manager. And because of that experience, I rotated through sales, marketing, services, procurement, and operations to get a well-balanced perspective so that I could think end to end to solve problems. And that's kind of how I got here.
Incredible. I think, you touched on the point there of kind of thinking through it backwards. And I think that's a lot of what people miss in a certain role, right? They look at the position as kind of trying to look up, and I think by looking kind of backwards, right? Looking at that what does a boss need from me? I think that's an important step that can be missed. With that, as you look back, kind of, I'm sure a lot of mentors and peers have given you advice over the years that's led to this great success. Are there any pieces of advice that really stick out to you as you look back on your career?
I think the one that I would highlight to you, or that I think is debatable, but it's something I believe in, is some people try to go into jobs where they can focus on their development opportunities and the things that they're not great at. I take a different approach. If you can find your superhuman strength or what you're really good at, I would tell you to double down on that and use that to soar forward. And so you're really soaring with your strengths is the approach I would say is probably the best advice that I've been given.
So when you kind of think about that, right, soaring with your strengths, can you kind of touch on how you've been able to maybe pick and choose your roles, or kind of within your roles worked to kind of always be working with your strengths? Do you kind of have an example of that?
Yeah, I would say that I learned that early on. I figured out that I was a probably a pretty good negotiator. Um, and with that, being good at negotiations, I put myself in commercially oriented roles after I realized my strengths. And so that is how I end up in sales, a bit in marketing, and then down to procurement. Those are very commercially oriented, financial, and I'm fairly analytical as well. And so that is probably the roles where I soared with the most. And some of these operational roles, as my boss says, commercially, I'm a samurai expert. Operationally, I'm okay.
I mean, I think it shows to a lot of people, right? I think when we look at people in your roles, especially from a college perspective, right? You're kind of looking so far ahead, and it kind of, right or wrong, you kind of imagine these people are just great at everything. So I think it is a great point for you to point out that there's still things, obviously, that you're better at than other things, right? So working to those strengths, I think, goes a long way. And I think, have you kind of always kept that in mind, or were there moments in your career where you tried to kind of do too much and realized actually I should just kind of stick to what I am good at? Do you have moments like that throughout your career?
Yeah, when I moved into the sales role, I did overstep my capabilities and the experience I needed to really do the job. We started 400 salespeople from scratch all at the same time, and we were competing against centers that were well established. And to go in there without any sales experience, any sales management experience, and to take that on The first 6 to 9 months was really, really rough, um, because you're trying to do everything versus do a couple of one or two things you're really good at. And that was quite challenging. So I would say that's probably one place where it took me a little while that I was a little slower out of the box. But with the amount of pressure on me, I figured it out pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think tying into what you said, obviously work to where you can't, where you do excel, but then sometimes you kind of just get thrown in the deep end in situations like yourself, and I think that's an important opportunity where you have to kind of just sink or swim. On that note, from your progressions, it's clear that you've gone above and beyond any role you've kind of been put in, right? What advice would you give to college students as they enter this work field? What advice would you give them to say, hey, go above and beyond your job? I think they hear that a lot, right? Go above the requirements, go above what you're being asked by your boss. But how specifically should they be doing that? Because obviously you've done it to progress through a company like Dell the way you have.
Okay, couple things. One is if I asked you to do X, Y, and Z, I would go do completed staff work on X, Y, and Z and make sure it's really complete, not just that you met exactly what they asked, but what are they going to go use it for? And did you think through it from that perspective? And if you have the context of what they're ultimately going to use it for, it may change a little bit what work you put into it. After I'm done with X, Y, and Z, I would probably think about what are the one or two questions that Alex Fahy is going to have when I send him this, and should I try to answer the questions in advance? Doing a couple of things like that help you get set up to where you may have just done X, Y, and Z, but when you read it and think through, it's like, what other questions or concerns, how do I make sure I don't get a response on this other than thank you? And two is that I set my boss up for success at the next meeting, to where I thought through it as if I was almost him or her.
That kind of relationship where you're kind of, you're able to understand what a boss is going to ask prior to being asking, right? Like, I think that, that's what I'm seeing a lot with this interview series is kind of, trying to predict answers, trying to kind of, orchestrate a conversation. And I find it hard the less and less I know a guest, right? So as you kind of, when you start in a new role, new boss, how do you kind of work to, obviously you've done it multiple times, but how do you work to kind of understand what is it this guy really wants? What makes this guy or girl, tick? What do they want to see out of me? How do you kind of understand a boss from that perspective when it is new?
Um, how do you understand a boss if I think the best way to go, well, how I got to understand my boss is through um, putting, I would say, in high pressured search situations, working around them. Then you tend to figure out what they're really good at and what you're really good at. And you see how you complement the team. Um, and if you can complement the team, then you can kind of make the most about what you and the other person have together. And second of all, through those high pressured situations, more than likely you'll start to develop a really strong bond of trust. If you can develop a strong bond of trust, the amount of empowerment and incremental work that you'll get beyond that is it will explode.
Yeah, I think, it's that goes back to that more powerful as a team, right? And I think the more you kind of understand the way a team works, right? If you're a new, whether you're a new member to it or you have new members joining, I think the more you can understand a team, obviously, the better you guys can progress forward. With that, you've touched on kind of the healthy relationships you've had with your bosses throughout kind of Dell. You've obviously stayed there an extremely long time. What is it about Dell and those roles and maybe some of those people that has kept you there for so long?
One is, Alex, the short of it is I realized probably about, I only meant to stay here 2 to 3 years and I was going to move on to go start my own company is what I thought. Um, what I realized is I actually felt like I fit in at Dell really quickly. And when you fit in somewhere and it's not work, it doesn't feel like work, it makes things a whole lot easier. I worked at a place before Dell where I didn't fit in. I didn't fit in with my team. I was 20 years younger than anyone else on the team. and I was at a really slow, lethargic contract at a company, and I was completely miserable. I went to Dell, and I felt like it was a hand in glove fit. I was changing jobs every 18 months. I was moving around like a college sophomore into different areas of new ideas and getting to see new stuff. Um, and so, and it's meritocracy to where they rewarded performance, and I was willing to take risk. And so that worked out pretty well, and it's kind of just kept going. But when work doesn't feel like work and you feel like you fit in somewhere and you're happy and you spring out of bed in the morning, those are all good signs.
I think, as I look at your position, your career now, and I kind of go, that makes sense to me, right? I can imagine that you enjoy work. I can imagine you enjoy the position you're in. I can imagine you enjoy getting out of bed in the morning. If I could take you kind of back, 20 something years and look at it from the perspective of a recent college graduate, right? You've just joined a company. You're finally happy that, this all paid off, that college degree paid off. I think a lot of people can get stuck in a role for too long because of that pressure they felt to get the job in the first place. But how should they look introspectively at their position in a company and go, okay, I feel like Rob in this position. When should they kind of look at it and go, I feel like Rob in this position, I feel like I fit in here? And when are situations where they should go, actually, I need to start kind of thinking about when to get out of here. I need to start planning my next, transition away.
I think it probably takes you about 2 years at a company and know whether you fit in or not. At our company, I typically ask people at like 20 months, I'm like, are you staying, you going? And people are like, what? And I said, now's about the point where you realize it's a good fit or a bad fit here. And so the question is where your head's at. I think if, and I wanted to say this earlier, but so say you do realize you fit in and you're like, where do I go with my career? I don't know how to go plan my career out. Here's what I would do. I would think like you're going to college, but instead of going to look at programs to where it tells you need to take course X, Y, and Z, you need these electives, these are mandatory core, go pull people's resume that you think are high flyers that you aspire to be. Go look at the jobs they took and the diversity of the jobs that they took and how they moved around. If you grab 15 or 20 of those resumes, it's almost like going to college and building a curriculum up about how you should go to work and think about the types of jobs you should have. And to make that more specific, did they rotate departments between marketing, finance, and operations? Or did they move between change the business roles and run the business roles and move their way up? Because those are all different types of skills and ways to do it. And lastly, if you don't get the job that you want as soon as you get out of college and you're at someplace, it's okay. I've taken them and I had to take a bunch of jobs that I either didn't really like or kind of liked, but I figured it out, made it work. And then I ultimately got to the job it is that I wanted to get to.
Yeah, that's no, I think I did that a little bit about a year ago. I kind of looked at kind of where I wanted to be, and I just kind of looked at, okay, what does the resume of someone who's 20 years into this industry look like? Okay, well, what's that? What is that skill that I'm seeing on 10 of these resumes? I should probably go get that, or that certification, or where did most of these people work? What was the roles? I think being able to see it, right, doesn't make it easy, but it makes it simple sometimes, being able to see it in front of your face. With that, you touched kind of on obviously college there and kind of building a career similar to a curriculum. Obviously, you've had a strenuous, college. You have a lot of degrees, and you went back multiple times. How have your different, college and university experiences and those different degrees, how have those shaped your career path?
Um, Alex, what I've kept is, so just for context, I got my bachelor's at 42 and I got my MBA at 43. I made executive at Dell at 33. So it's a little unorthodox, and I bring that up for a reason. Um, I've kept a continuous learning path each year. I'm like, what course am I going to? What books am I going to read this year? But I kept a growth mindset the entire time, even before I was 20, I was reading and doing things. It was just a little unconventional. I think as long as you keep a growth mindset, whether you're trying to learn Spanish, French, or Mandarin, and you keep rotating that, even if it's with things like beekeeping to become a travel guide, as long as you're climbing up an S curve and you keep jumping off and resetting that before you start to rest on your laurels, I think that will work out. Now, I did take a lot of business classes and along the way, but again, I'm literally registering for one next March. I'm gonna take at Harvard on my own dime on private equity. So I would say just keep the growth mindset going. If you can't afford to go to school, go to the library, or go ask for advice, or go join a club, go join Toastmasters. That's almost free. So there's a variety of things like that that I think people can stay in a growth mindset. As long as you stay in a growth mindset, I think you'll be in the top 10% of the people that are in the workforce.
Without a doubt, I think you put it so simply, but it is, I think you see it throughout multiple people's careers where they kind of get to a position and see it as a destination, right? And I think as I look at your career, I think that's something that stands out to me as someone who kind of has never seen anything as a destination and kind of goes, as you said, continuous learning, continuous growth, and trying to always progress up. I think that's something that a lot of college students and maybe even people well into their career should probably put back in their mind of what is the point in this if it's not progressing me and the company or the role forward, right? So I think that's great advice. As we wrap this up, I'd like to ask you one final question. If there was really one piece of advice you could give your 20-year-old self, what would that piece of advice be?
I would tell you to do whatever you go do, make sure that you really enjoy what you're doing. And if you don't do it, change it. It's okay to say that I didn't make a good choice and I'm going to change it. The worst thing to do is to make a bad choice and stick with it and be miserable as hell. I would be where you're thriving on your best day. And you may not always pick right the first time, but once you find the groove, I would stick with it.
Rob, some great advice. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks.